Welcome to this video as we talk about St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching on gratitude and ingratitude in the Summa Theologica, especially as at the time that I'm recording this, it is the day before Thanksgiving, and so it's something that I think is on a lot of people's mind. And so Thanksgiving means being appreciative of the things that are given to us, and it'd be interesting to see as we go through this how maybe there were some nuances in the 13th century that are a little bit different than today's date. So when we talk about ingratitude, we give kids toys, we get showered, a lot of kids do, and most of us for that matter, with a lot of things, and how we respond might be more than just bad manners. The way we respond with ingratitude, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, is a pretty serious thing. In fact, it could potentially be a mortal sin, as you will see as we go through these lessons. Okay, so the gratitude and ingratitude are two questions in the Summa Theologica in the second part of the Summa, which is called the Secunda Secundae, and it falls under the section on justice. Now, the reason I have this image that just popped up on the screen is that one thing you got to understand is that in the Middle Ages, in the 13th century, when St. Thomas Aquinas lived, usury or lending money on interest was considered wrong. In fact, that was not allowed according to St. Thomas Aquinas. He has a question about that in the Summa. And why does that matter? Well, because as we look at repaying debt in a sense of gratitude, it's going to play a role, I think, as you'll see in a moment, how it's different today as opposed to lending money with interest. And I don't think we have to send our banker thank you notes, for example, because he's getting something out of it, right? So let's go to it. And the first article we'll talk about is whether thankfulness is a special virtue distinct from other virtues. Now, when we talk about gratitude, some people may think, well, are we talking about gratitude towards God, gratitude towards, our country or our parents, or what exactly are we talking about? That's what Aquinas is getting at in this article here. He says the nature of the debt to be paid must needs vary according to various causes giving rise to the debt, yet so that the greater always includes the lesser. Now, this is important because, as you might expect, the greater is going to imply God. Okay, it applies to God because all things come from God. Okay, now, so that means there's a relationship between the favors we're given by just friends or other people, and Thomas relates it all to the blessings that we receive from God. Okay, now the cause of debt is found primarily and chiefly in God, in that he is the first principle of all our goods. Secondarily, it is found in our Father, because he is the proximate principle of our begetting and upbringing. Thirdly, it is found in the person that excels in dignity, from whom general favors proceed. Father is obvious. He means biological father, and he will include the mother, although he didn't mention the mother here. But as far as those who excel in dignity, I think he would mean kings or queens back then, or prelates or priests or bishops. I think that's what Thomas had in mind. Fourthly, it is found in a benefactor, from whom we have received particular and private favors, on account of which we're under a particular obligation to him. Now, does this mean favors of money, favors of gifts, just somebody giving us something? He doesn't explain it specifically, but I think that's what he's talking about, is that when we are given something by somebody other than a king or a queen or our father or mother or God, that's what this article is talking about. He goes on, accordingly, since what we owe God or our Father or a person excelling in dignity is not the same as what we owe a benefactor from whom we have received some particular favor, it follows that after religion, whereby we pay God due worship, so that religion is a virtue, where we are thankful to God and we give him due worship for all the blessings that he's given us, and piety, whereby we worship our parents. It's interesting, he doesn't mean worship in the same sense as worshiping God, but giving reverence and due respect to our parents, and that's a virtue of piety. It also implies to love of country, piety does. And and then observance, whereby we worship persons excelling in dignity, There is thankfulness or gratitude, whereby we give thanks to our benefactors, and it is distinct from the foregoing virtues, just as each of these is distinct from the one that precedes, or as falling short thereof. Interesting, he doesn't use the word worship when he talks about benefactors. He does with people excelling in dignity, with parents, and of course with God as well, but he doesn't use that word with the benefactors. All right, whether a man is bound to give thanks to every benefactor, so every single person that gives us, something, are we bound to give thanks to them? He says every effect turns naturally to its cause. Wherefore Dionysius says that God turns all things to himself because he is the cause of all. Okay, this is important. Okay, so God pours out his blessings, and we owe God thanks, and all these other blessings indirectly come from God, and so there's a certain return of thanks to God that we give through the benefactor who gives us something, okay? For the effect must needs always be directed to the end of the agent. And now it is evident that a benefactor as such is cause of the beneficiary, okay, obviously. Hence the natural order requires that he who has received a favor should, by repaying the favor, turn to his benefactor according to the mode of each. A man owes his benefactor as such honor and reverence, since the latter stands to him in the relation of principle, but accidentally he owes him assistance or support if he need it. All right, so again, we're seeing a comparison here between what we owe God and what we owe the intermediaries, who are the benefactors who proceed from God and give us some specific blessing, right? Okay, whether repayment of gratitude should surpass the favor received. Now, this is where I think we have to take into mind the whole idea of usury. Nowadays, people give us money, and banks do, and they charge us interest, and it's a financial transaction. That was not allowed back then. Okay, so if somebody back then gave you $1,000, or and then if you just paid them $1,000, that'd be one thing. But look what Thomas says here. Gratitude regards the favor received according the intention of the benefactor, who seems to be deserving of praise, chiefly for having conferred the favor gratis without being bound to do so. Wherefore the beneficiary is under a moral obligation to bestow something gratis in return. Now he does not seem to bestow something gratis unless he exceeds the quantity of the favor received, because so long as he repays less or an equivalent, he would seem to do nothing gratis, but only to return what he has received. Therefore, gratitude always inclines as far as possible to pay back something more. Now, if our next door neighbor gives you a dozen eggs, does that mean you return 13 eggs? If our friend gives us a $1,000 loan, do we give 1,100? So it almost sounds like usury, but it's not forced. Okay, usury means that you charge interest as part of the transaction. I think Thomas is saying that, he is saying you need to give back more, but not in a contractual type of obligation, but more from a virtuous standpoint. Okay, now let's turn our attention to ingratitude. Is it always a sin? He says ingratitude is reckoned among other sins. 2 Timothy 3:2, whereas it is written, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, wicked. He says a debt of gratitude is a moral debt required by virtue. Now, a thing is a sin from the fact of its being contrary to virtue, wherefore it is evident that every ingratitude is a sin. Now, I think this is important because typically if we have kids or somebody we know who is just a very ungrateful person, we might say they lack manners, or they just don't carry themselves very well. Thomas takes this further. He says this is a sin. In fact, it could be a mortal sin, all right? Whether ingratitude is always a mortal sin, okay? A man may be ungrateful in two ways. First, by mere omission, for instance, by failing to recognize the favor received, or to express his appreciation of it, or to pay something in return. And this is not always a mortal sin, because the debt of gratitude requires a man to make a liberal return, which, however, he is not bound to do. Wherefore, if he fail to do so, he does not sin mortally. Okay, so I think what Thomas is saying here is there are some circumstances where maybe the person forgets, or they're just careless, or maybe they don't have the means to return it, or there's some circumstances when it would just be a venial sin, right? It is nevertheless a venial sin because it arises either from some kind of negligence or from some disinclination to virtue in him. And yet, ingratitude of this kind may happen to be a mortal sin by reason either of inward contempt or of the kind of thing withheld, this being needful to the benefactor, either simply or in some case of necessity. So I think the mortal sin aspect of it falls in line with a lack of charity. Like, for example, let's say you're expecting a 5% raise and you get a 2.5% raise, and you actually hold your boss in contempt. You're angry. Okay, that could be a mortal sin because you're not grateful for what you got. Or if grandma puts a $20 bill in the card for your birthday and you're expecting $50, and you actually get angry at grandma because she only gave you $20, well, that could be a mortal sin. I think that's what he's saying here, okay? So in this time of Thanksgiving, again, this is recorded the day before Thanksgiving, we have to remember that thanksgiving and gratitude is a virtue, and that ingratitude is a sin. And in fact, it can be a mortal sin, considering the circumstances and the intention of the person who is ungrateful. Thanks a lot for watching. God bless you.